Hello, hello. Let's get started. Chapter 11. Face to Robot Face. Jeff did not get tired, but he did get sleepy. He didn't know enough physiology to explain that, but he assumed that having a human brain meant that he still required sleep. The problem, as night fell, was finding a place where he could sleep without interruption. The city remained active at night, but safety was not the problem. In a city of robots he had no fear of crime, so any place where he would not be awakened would be acceptable. However, he expected that the sight of him, as a robot, remaining motionless for a protracted period, may attract unwanted attention. He certainly didn't want a robot or two carrying him off bodily to a repair station because he had gone inert. Jeff learned more about his robot eyes as he considered this problem. At first, as the sun went down and night came on, they opened in much the same degree as his human eyes had. They adjusted slowly, and not really very much. Robot City had outdoor lighting, but it was not as bright as that of the cities on Aurora he had visited. The reason became obvious when night had fallen completely. He was walking along the edge of a tiled plaza, hoping to find a secluded spot where he could simply stop. Reclining was not necessary, and go to sleep in private. As he peered into the darkness beyond the far edge of the plaza, the entire area suddenly grew much larger, practically flying at him. He straightened in surprise, then laughed at himself. His new eyes had a zoom capability that he had somehow triggered accidentally. In order to test it, he stood where he was and tried to get his eyes to do something else. After looking at objects at several different distances, he found that if he focused on something as close as his own feet, his vision returned to normal and stayed that way. The zoom effect was triggered when he tried to focus for more than a few seconds on a distant object. If he just looked into the distance without trying to focus on detail, his vision remained normal. More important at the moment, however, was his discovery of night vision. As he had experimented with his focal lengths, he had not noticed that the tile of the plaza, his robotic feet, and a low, decorative wall on the far edge of the plaza had all gradually become clearer. Now as he looked around, he realized that he could see with a stunning clarity. This, too, had happened automatically, like the narrowing and widening of human pupils. Only in this case some other sensitivity was also built in. He didn't know what the sensitivity was, but he appreciated it. The objects around him were sharply outlined, illuminated by the city lighting that was sufficient when he used his new robotic night vision. The only hint of darkness was in the distance, outside the range of the nearest lights. His new vision sped up his search considerably. With a combination of night vision and zoom, he quickly eliminated the plaza area as a sleeping spot. He also realized that the robots would be able to see him with a similar ease, so finding a place to sleep would not depend on darkness. With that in mind, he began walking through areas that had unusually shaped architecture. "All right," he said to himself, "I used to hide as a kid. This is basically the same thing. This ought to be easier than that, since I don't think anybody is really searching for me." He thought of the medical team, but decided that if they were looking for him, they were a long way off. He had been hoping that the unusual architecture of some of the buildings might offer a small space where he could hide. Standing and lying flat were both equally unnecessary. He could actually squat down or double up in any fashion without the usual danger of his limbs going to sleep, or needing to move to get more comfortable while sleeping. The architecture did not help him, however. The more distinct designs involved geometric shapes that had no small spaces in which he could crouch, and the simpler buildings were usually made up of modular rectangles of various proportions. The other way to hide was in plain sight. He would have to look occupied even while he was motionless in sleep. The tunnel system would provide that chance. He went down into the first tunnel stop he found. The worst result he could think of was that he might not be able to stop at the same place he got on, but since he didn't know his way around the city anyway, that hardly mattered. He would be equally lost anywhere. He stepped into a platform booth and looked in mystification at the controls. The best he could do was mark this particular stop. When he woke up he could try to make it bring him back here. If that didn't work, he would stop anywhere he could. Once the booth was on its way, he stood erect in a position that seemed casual enough and relaxed. At first, the noise of air rushing past the booth kept him awake, but then he remembered that he could control his hearing now as well. He lowered his aural sensitivity, though he did not shut it off, and as he became fully relaxed, he felt himself to be the construct of two distinct parts. Earlier, he had felt integrated as a cyborg. Now he really felt himself to be a human brain housed in a motionless manufactured unit that was just minimally active in order to keep his brain alive. It was a protective shell, apart from his own personal being, in a way that his biological body never had been. In a few moments he was asleep, still standing up in the platform booth as it rushed through the tunnel system of Robot City. Jeff woke up in near total disorientation. Ahead of him, a robot was standing in a transparent booth, speeding along a track down a mysterious tunnel. He looked around in alarm, and then suddenly his new life came back to him. Yes, his arms were still blue and robotic. He was still in this strange, manufactured body. He was still all alone. His ploy had worked, at least. None of the robots had bothered him while he slept. He sensed vaguely that he had been dreaming, but he had no memory of the details, nor did he think they had been pleasant. He did figure out how to get the booth to carry him back to the same tunnel stop where he had ended. That accomplished, he rode up the ramp to daylight and looked around. He was satisfied that his one basic need, a place to sleep, had been arranged. Clothing was not necessary, and he knew that his robot body had an energy pack that was independent of ordinary food. He wasn't sure how it was able to keep his brain alive, but since it was working, he wasn't going to worry about it either. "Well, Jeff," he said aloud to himself, "it's time to see this new life of yours in earnest. Let's see what we can see." He stepped onto the slow lane of the nearest sidewalk and rode, gazing up at all the majestic, sweeping shapes of the city's most striking structures. The city was busier now than it had been the night before. He decided that perhaps the robots had scheduled indoor work for the night hours. His night vision had been very good, but it could not make up for a lack of sunlight. He rode the sidewalk for a long time. Patience was not a problem, as the city both fascinated and worried him. Without a pressing schedule, or any physical needs to satisfy, he had nothing else to do. Every so often he stepped off carefully onto a sliding, intersecting sidewalk, and kept going. He still couldn't tell his way around, but little by little he began to recognize certain landmarks. Even now he looked about carefully everywhere. The medical team probably still wanted him, and any robot that suspected he was not susceptible to the laws would be horrified by the idea. They wouldn't get him, though, not if he was careful. Then, as the sidewalk carried him under some sort of transport chute, a breeze came wafting to him from a new direction. Jeff instinctively turned his head and inhaled, and became aware, for the first time, that he did not breathe in the usual human manner. Obviously his brain needed oxygen, but the rest of his body did not require it. As he had with other questions about his new physiology, he dropped the question of how his body was taking in oxygen and supplying it to his brain. The fact of his continued existence proved that some process was working. He guessed that he could inhale largely for the purpose he was using now, to use the sense of smell. "Magellanic fromage," he said quietly to himself, recognizing the aroma. He didn't want to be overheard, but the impulse to talk out loud was getting stronger. "Fromage in a kind of tangy sauce, I'd say. It smells great. I haven't had any of that in a long time. Let's go see." He stepped off the sidewalk, caught his balance, and started walking in the direction of the scent. His body didn't need food apparently, but the desire to taste enjoyable dishes was still with him. A number of his favorite dishes came to him: Magellanic fromage, Kobe steak, giazzi, fresh strawberries. He wasn't sure if he could eat even if he wanted to, though he supposed not. Still, he could certainly enjoy smelling the stuff. He was also hoping to find human companionship. I wouldn't get my hopes up, Geoffrey, old boy. You can't trust him with the truth, anyhow. Traffic was moderately heavy here, but most of it was just function robots, which were no threat to him as they went about their business, unobservant and incurious. A few humanoid robots appeared from time to time, but none showed any interest in him. One robot, however, seemed to stay near Jeff, turning the same corners and walking in the same direction. Jeff dropped back gradually, keeping a suspicious eye on this one robot. He did not appear to have noticed Jeff, but he had another odd quality. This robot was pushing a small two-wheeled cart in front of him. The cart, which had 4 solid gray sides but no lid, was weirdly primitive for this city of robots who could transplant human brain, raise dynamic, glittering edifices, and guide what looked like a fully functioning society without human help. Lacking even its own power source, the cart was a throwback to ancient times. Yet here it was. Derek had continued to code some of Ariel's better dishes and place them under the fan, though the constant moving from the console to the processor and back prevented him from concentrating on streamlining the recalcitrant computer. He finally decided to take a real break from the computer and follow Ariel's lead of the chemical processor. At the very least, he might help improve the food they had to eat. Since the better codes had all been preserved, his failures wouldn't cost them anything, and success might make their existence here much more tolerable. The supervisor robots had arranged for them to be given a large supply of basic nutritional requirements in chemical form. These had been augmented by a harvest of edible plants out in the reservoir area. To produce an edible dish, various ingredients were mixed together with water in the processor itself and heated according to the codes. He started by trying to make the nutrition bars more tasty. First, he got too much vanilla flavoring, though the result was definitely strong in flavor. When he attempted to add a hint of banana, he got something similar to a muddy-tasting Auroran root vegetable. It wasn't exactly good, but it was certainly different. He erased the code for that one, though he stuck the dish under the fan. Maybe his quarry liked Auroran root vegetables. Ariel's bacon was nearly perfect, so he didn't mess with that. His first attempt at Magellanic frittata had come out more like overboiled trisus leaves and blue cheese, so he'd recycled that one without even exhausting the aroma. Another attempt at that had been more successful, and the aroma was being fanned outside right now. He was trying to create a banana pudding when Ariel came back in. Yuck! She winced and stuck out her tongue, and I thought my stuff stunk. Frost, Derek, what did you kill in here? He laughed. You're smelling my first batch of Mandelic frittata. The second is better, and this new dish should also work. Banana pudding should be easy, don't you think? If we don't die from the trisus fumes first, did my stuff smell this bad? If it did, I owe you an apology. No, not really. Could you smell anything outside? Oh, yes. Basically, we're in pretty good shape. The configuration of the surrounding buildings has created a perfect constant horizontal wind going from the fan. Let's see, that way. She jerked her thumb. The robot traffic is fairly heavy in that direction, so they can all help direct our people here. Now we just have to hope they get close enough to ask. The other way, though, nobody will smell anything. True, but the robots are circulating on their normal activities. They'll be spreading out all over the place. Okay. I hope this works. We've done just about everything. She nodded. If you want to take a turn stretching your legs, I'll take over here. Thanks. I think that pudding needs more water. Derek strode outside with a spring in his step, glad to be in the open for a change. In the distance, however, the great shining dome of the Key Center seemed to taunt him. He refused to have his mood dampened, and turned away from it to start walking. More out of curiosity than necessity, he located the breeze that she had mentioned. The banana pudding smelled pretty good, though I supposed starving people might prefer something more solid and nutritious. He stepped onto a slidewalk, but kept walking in a large rectangle around the general area. Actually, spotting their human visitors didn't seem as unlikely as it once had. even if that was only a new optimism. As he came downwind of the breeze from the fan again, he was pleasantly surprised to recognize the scent of a decent dish of Mangelic fromage carried along by it. Perhaps her extra practice with the processor was paying off. Now that he had loosened up a little, he decided that he might as well head back. Waiting was still waiting, whether he sat inside or marched aimlessly around town. When he arrived, Airlie was leaning in the doorway. She raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw him. "What are you doing back so soon? I thought the whole idea was for us to take turns in getting away for a bit." "I did get away. Now I'm back." "Frost, Derek. If I'd known that was all you were going to do, I would have stayed out longer myself. I came back early just for you." "I wouldn't have cared if you stayed out longer. I didn't ask you to come back early." "Well, do you mind if I go for another walk?" "Of course not. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" As he waited for an answer, he stepped back from a humanoid robot walking toward them, assuming that the robot wanted to pass by. "Oh, I don't know," she said irritably. "I guess this do-nothing phase just doesn't suit me very well then." The robot did not walk past them. He looked at Derek closely as, without stopping, he moved past him through the doorway. "Hey," Derek said in surprise, "can we help you? This is a private residence. Ours, that is." The robot turned and looked back and forth between them. "Identify yourself," Ariel commanded. The robot seemed uncertain, which is very rare in a robot. "I gave you an instruction. Now identify yourself." I'm Tunnel Foreman, 12." "Say, wait a minute. That sounds familiar. Did I talk to you before? About the search?" "Yes, you did." "Well, why didn't you say so? If you came to report, Derek and I are the ones to report to. What have you learned?" "I haven't really learned anything." "Then what are you doing here?" Derek asked. "Do you have a question?" The robot hesitated, looking back and forth between them as if in puzzlement. "Something's wrong with him," said Ariel. "Get on the console and call repair facility. He isn't acting right." The robot started to leave. "Stay here," Ariel ordered. When he didn't stop, she caught his arm. "I urge you to stay put. What's wrong with you? Now freeze." Derek had started inside, but when the robot yanked his arm free of Ariel, he stopped in shock. "Are you forgetting the laws? You've been ordered to freeze." The robot grabbed Ariel by the shoulders and flung her out of his way, slamming her against the wall. Derek launched himself between them, hoping to prevent the assault from continuing, even as disbelief flooded him. He saw the robot's arm swinging backhand toward him, but had no chance to react as the incredibly hard robot hand casually smacked him in the forehead and blackened his vision. Derek felt himself fall backward into the wall and slide to the base of the doorway in a sitting position. He sat motionless for a moment, getting his breath back and gathering his wits. When he looked around, the robot was gone. And thus ends the 11th chapter. Bum bum bum.